DogWorks Radio is sponsored by Alaska Dog Works. Check out their website at alaskadogworks.com. From First Paw Media, sponsored by First Paw Coffee Company, this is the Dog Driver Show. Visit our website at dogworksradio.com. Now here are your hosts, Robert Forto and Kurosh Parto.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Robert and I'm here with my co-host KP and we are the Dog Driver Show, and today we have a very special guest calling in from Fairbanks, Alaska. His name is Arleigh Reynolds. If you're involved with dog sports, you know the name for sure, and it's a pleasure to have him on our show. Let's get to it. KP, what do you know about Arleigh?
Arleigh Reynolds. Arleigh is a champion of the champions. He is someone that I know actually, I believe, probably, I don't know if he remembers or not, we probably met over 20 years ago in northern Michigan at a training camp up in Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And when he, I believe, lived on the East Coast, I mean, the guy has done it all and he's won it all, actually. And true champion, always open with his knowledge to share information with people. I'm very, very happy to have him with us. Arleigh, a lot of our listeners are not familiar with the sled dog sport. And tell us about how you started and who you are.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, and it's nice to get a chance to chat with you guys. I got started in dog mushing kind of a strange way. I was a veterinarian and had graduated from vet school and was out in practice and really liked what I was doing, but was seeing that about 90% of what I was doing every day was starting to get kind of routine, and I wanted a job I'd never need an alarm clock for to get out of bed. And I'd been an endurance athlete myself. I'd rode crew in college and gotten into marathon canoe racing, and kind of wanted to combine those interests of veterinary medicine and endurance sports, and could either go with horses or dogs. And I thought the dogs would be more interesting, and had never driven a dog team. But at that time, the American Veterinary Medical Association had a scholarship that you could apply for that would fund a PhD in clinical nutrition and allow you to get board certified at the end of that. And so I wrote a proposal to look at the relationship between diet and performance in sled dogs, and it got funded. So during that PhD, I worked with Harris Dunlap and got some dogs and learned how to train them, and looked at the benefits of high carbohydrate and high fat diets. And by the time I got done with that, man, I mean, it went from being a kind of a cool PhD experiment to like one of the great passions of my life. And I remember my advisor telling me, hey, it was great, you got to play with dogs for 4 years, now you got to get a real job. And I said, you know what, I think I could make this into a career because they're such an interesting model for everything. But I also realized that no matter what I did in the laboratory, in order to for people to take it seriously, I needed to get out and show that it really worked in the field. So I started racing and really enjoyed that. And so my research actually paid for my racing.
Arleigh, what was your first race? Do you recall that?
Yeah. It was at Saranac Lake in 1988. And it was, I raced a 6-dog team with 6 of Harris's dogs. And I think I came in 20-something out of like 40 teams, and probably fell off the sled 3 times the first time I did it. And, you know, I was hooked for sure.
And tell me how all of that from a 6-dog class of Harris's just evolved into having your own dogs and getting more and more involved and becoming an open racer in Alaska.
Well, I started, at Cornell, and we had a small kennel there that was mostly research kennel, and I raced the 8-dog circuit across the Midwest and northern Canada, and really liked that, and started then coming up to Alaska, and I did a lot of work with some of the Iditarod mushers, did some research with their teams, and started bringing my dogs up to race in the 10-dog and 8-dog circuit here in Alaska, and it was just so different. I mean, it's kind of like fishing in Alaska. Once you've done dog mushing up here, it wrecks you for any place else because the trails are so nice and competition's so good, and it was just great. So I said, I got to figure out a way to move here, and so it took me a little while, but I ended up leaving the university and taking a job in the private sector with Purina, and looked at, again, continuing that work with performance nutrition, but also using dogs as a model of stress. The stress that a sled dog undergoes is very similar to stress that other dogs experience, but they like to do what they're doing, so you don't have to put them in an uncomfortable position, to see how you can intervene nutritionally to help support stress with the immune system or the gut or with antioxidants. We continued that research. Actually, we're still doing it now. This is more than 20 years later. And so that's how I got to Alaska. And then, once I was here, I kind of made that evolution from 8-dog driver to open class around 2001, 2002. And both of those arenas, limited class, every arena of dog mushing is awesome, and it all has its own challenges, and it's not like one is better than the other. But for me, the open class really fit. There was so much that went into breeding the dogs, training the dogs, the strategy during racing, and the nutritional side of it, that it just was really a great fit for my interests.
And myself as a limited class driver who tried to hit the open class and play with the big boys, it's difficult to make this step, adjust the dogs and the training. How was that for you in training time, number of dogs?
Yeah, we never had a big racing kennel. We had a fair number of dogs because a lot of our dogs were mostly dedicated to doing the research work. But I never had more than, say, 24, and a really good year, maybe 28 dogs that I could work with for my open team. So our goal with our training was try to get the most, to help each of the dog reach their own potential. We weren't trying to push them beyond their potential, but to try to help them reach their potential and to do the best I could with the dogs that I had. And we were very fortunate that we got some really good dogs, and learned a lot. And I really appreciate that question, because I think I've learned way more from my failures than I have from my successes. I'll give you an example. In 2006, I didn't finish either the Rendezvous or the North American, and my goal was to win both of those races, and I wasn't able to even complete them. But what I did was I took a step back and looked at my training logs and the way that I had raced, and I found that I'd made some pretty significant mistakes, particularly in the strategies I was using in races. And I adjusted those, and after that, I never finished out of the top 3 after that. So I think if I hadn't had that epic failure that year, that I probably never would have become a champion, because I would have just continued to be doing okay, all right, pretty good, but not at the level you need to be a champion.
I completely appreciate this response. It's so true. Myself, I had this last year, and it, not being able to complete Rendezvous, and I told Deanna, my wife, and I said, this is the worst day of my sled dog career, actually, because I couldn't understand. However, I took a step back, like you said, looked at the reason and what happened, what did not happen, and you definitely learn a lot about that. So when did Rendezvous and ONAC became your focus, and how did you prepare yourself and your dogs mentally and physically for that?
Well, I'd always dreamed about, some people dream of running the Iditarod. I'd always dreamed of running the Rendezvous and the North American, because for me, those were the pinnacle races in the type of dog mushing that I was interested in. And, I knew Harris Dunlap, I knew Roxy and Wright and Charlie Champagne and George Atla and Marvin Cochran and Harvey Drake and folks like that who had focused on those races. And they were kind of the folks that I looked up to and worked with, and Joey Reddington, of course, as well. And so it had always been a goal. And I remember the first time I ran the Rendezvous, it was just such an incredible experience. And we did okay. I think we finished 7th. But it was such a hard thing, to complete. And I know it sounds funny for folks that are more into distance mushing, that finishing 3 26 or 27-mile heats would be hard. But the mental preparation that you have to go through for both yourself and your dogs, and what you see, them go through and you go through, is it's not like just going out there and running 27 miles. And it took me, more than a decade to really figure out how to be competitive and win those races. And that was a great challenge. I love challenges. I think if you want to really enjoy something, you go and you race against the best in the most challenging situations, and then and see how you rise to that situation. So that was always my goal. And then in terms of training, first I had to figure out what types of dogs, and I think we all select for dogs that fit our personality. I like really enthusiastic dogs, which is great because they always want to go, but it's a challenge when you're trying to develop a specific pace. And and Rendezvous is all about pace. So it took me a while to get that part dialed in. And one of the things that really helped is I ended up with a great leader named Guts, who was just like driving a car with an accelerator pedal on the steering wheel. And I could put her at any speed I wanted, and literally you could write your name in an open field with her. And that really is what put us over the top. But learning to pace, I think, for Rendezvous was the big thing. And then for North American, the big thing was, because that's such a combination of speed and distance, pace was important there too, but also selecting for dogs that had the capacity to run at those speeds easily. And getting back to your original question, to me that was the real excitement of this type of racing, is that the dogs go so fast for so long. I've looked at and actually put dogs on treadmills and measured their VO2 max. I've looked at lots of canine athletes, and I think that what dogs do in open class sprint racing is probably the most challenging thing from a physical capacity point of view of any side of our sport. And I don't mean to denigrate the other sides. They're all awesome. The speeds that limited class people go are amazing. The distance and conditions that long distance teams go through are amazing. But what I mean is, I put this as an example of like the business world. There are fewer guys that can throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball than there are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. It's just a God-given talent to be able to throw a ball like that, and it's a God-given talent to be able to run nearly 20 miles an hour for 30 miles. There are just so very few dogs that can do that. Whereas if you take the speed back a little bit, or you aren't running as far, now you have more dogs that are capable of doing that. And we've shown that with our Rondi teams. We've beaten the best 8-dog and 10-dog teams when we were racing. When years the Rendezvous was canceled, we'd go to North Pole or races like that where you had the people that had that were going to win that year the Limited North American, or had been winning all the 8-dog races, and beat them. And it's not that I'm not saying we're just better than everybody. It's just that the capacity of an open class sprint dog, a championship open class sprint dog, is really amazing, and there just aren't many dogs that can run that fast for that far.
It is so true what Arleigh says. I mean, it is like I'm just absorbing everything he says. It is. I was shocked after I trained my own dog team in open class and selected so few dogs to run the open, and the very first time that I switched them from open to limited, in my head I'm like, I don't know how they're gonna do, but heck, they went there and they won. Dogs who were running 24 5 miles, they're running 8 miles the next week, and they're performing. You are so true. You mentioned it took you a little bit to understand what type of dog you want to run. Tell me a little bit of your dogs and in general, and your bloodlines and what you have behind them, Arleigh.
Yeah, we were really fortunate. I got to work with a lot of the best people in our sport, and I always tried to absorb every piece of information I could, and then try to make it fit with what we were trying to do. So I sat around kitchen tables at Joey Reddington's and Harvey Drake's and Roxy's and Harris's, and played people like that, George, of course. When Egel first came over in 1998, he had a great dog named Lubin. And when you looked at Egel's bloodlines, Mike got a ton of credit, and Mike was an amazing dog. But it was Lubin and his sisters, I think, that really played into what made Egel's team what it was. At the combination of those two, I wouldn't separate and say one was better than the other, but I would give equal credit to Lubin's lines. And he had Lubin with him. Lubin was 8 years old, and I bred to that dog. It happened to be the last litter that dog had. He unexpectedly died when he went home with Egel that year. And I got 8 puppies out of that litter. Every single one of them were leaders, and one of them in that litter was a dog named Kyle. And Kyle set the new standard for me. And then we brought in Thomas Warner and Brigitte Ness had a line of Greysters, 1/4 Greyhound, 7/8 Forster or German Shorthair Pointer, and we bred those. They were super houndy, obviously. We bred those to Joey Reddington Huskies and got some phenomenal dogs, one of which actually was Jose, that went on to be Jennifer Probert's main foundation dog when she was doing so well. But 2 of the sisters made our team, and then their offspring were bred back to Kyle, who were just phenomenal. And then when Eric Lancer retired, he had a Mike daughter named Poker that he said set the standard for his kennel, and he retired her with us, and we bred her to Kyle 3 times. And that was more than half of my winning teams composition, and almost all those dogs ended up being leaders. So Guts came out of that breeding. So that sort of quarter English pointer that Kyle was bred to quarter German short hair pointers were what really made our team what it was. And like I said, we were just fortunate to have access to those dogs and to be able to select. Kyle represented about 25% of the puppies that we put on the ground over the course of his lifetime, but 75% of his puppies made the team. And when we did win, every single one of the dogs that we had in our team were either Kyle kids or grandkids. That was even true when Roxy won in 2017.
I remember,
he had been deceased for 4 years by that time.
Yeah, I remember those dogs leading your team, Arleigh. What is interesting, I'm listening to Arleigh, is you hear from the PhD side, suddenly he clicks to the Musher side, and he's like talking about dogs and how important those leaders are. And it's really, really, you see the passion in the conversation. Arleigh, now let's talk about your Rendezvous and your ONAC wins and your Triple Crown that you have. 2 years in a row, your dogs did that. Your team is one of the very few American teams winning this race in the last 20, 30 years, I believe. What did it take to get to that point?
Well, for us, like for I think any win, we were just really fortunate that a lot of things came together, and then of course, you try to put whatever you can in your favor. So we had the team, and I had the leader in Guts. That first North American victory, I don't know if you remember this, but that day I drew last, so I was number 15, and coming home on the sloughs, somebody had decided to clear the snowpack off a parking lot. So we came around a corner, and there were snow boulders, huge, like 6 foot by 4 foot snow boulders. On one side of the slough, they were probably 10 feet high, and on the shallowest side, they were over 6 feet high, completely filling the Noise Slough as we were coming home. And I come around the corner and see this wall and think, what the hell are we going to do? And Guts just went right over it. I mean, I just slowed the team down, and she climbed right over the top. And I thought, wow, how cool is that? And then I thought, man, I'm going to break both of my legs coming down this thing on the other side. But I didn't. We made it through, and we ended up winning that heat. But if I hadn't had her to get through that, there's no way we would have won that heat. And then, in terms of training, we tried to put things in our favor. We put dummies out on the trail so that dogs got used to passing people, because it's not crowds that bother them. It's individual people that are reaching out and clapping or yelling and stuff like that. We built a bridge because in Rendezvous, there's so many bridges you go over, and they're hollow underneath, and they make like a whomp, whomp, whomp sound, and the dogs aren't used to that. A lot of times they'll just lay down on the bridge. So we built a fake bridge with snow fence coming into and off of it, so they got used to that. We built a culvert so that every time they left the yard and came back to the yard from the time they were puppies, they went through the culvert. So that wasn't a problem for them. And we did a lot of passing training with Roxy in small teams, so the dogs got really good at passing. And one time I was coming home on the Rendezvous, and Eagle had some trouble, and his sled was hooked on one side of Cordova Street on the hill, and his dogs were all the way across on the other side. And it was just a complete T across the trail. And we came up on that, and I had Guts in lead, and I just said, we came up the left side of the hill, and I said, haw, and she went over about a 3-foot snow berm onto the sidewalk. Unfortunately, all the people moved out of the way. All 16 dogs went over the berm. We went up the sidewalk till we were past Eagle. I said, gee, she went right back over the berm and onto the street, and we came home without a hitch. And, I mean, having a dog like that is, there's very few that, if you get one in a lifetime, you're pretty lucky. So that was, we had the right dogs. We tried to prepare them right, and then it was all about pace. And one thing I learned that I think is really important is that I always like to get the long runs for Rendezvous done about a month before the race, not right before it. And the tough thing there was, the Exxon always came in 2 weeks ahead of time, and if you want to be successful in that, you've got to race 20 miles an hour. And to me, that was the wrong strategy, because it put the dogs at too fast of a pace for Rendezvous, and it was hard to get them back in the right mindset. So when we did race the Exxon, we rarely raced it to win. We just raced it to give the dogs an experience. So we try to get them to that right Rendezvous pace by doing longer runs and doing those, like I said, about a month ahead of time. And by longer, I'm talking about 25 to 30-mile runs, but not at pace. We'd start off at like 15, 16 miles an hour, run the body at 16, and then, by the time we were getting to the last few of those runs, if they could finish that run at 18 miles an hour, I knew they were ready. The other thing that I learned is, like everybody else, if we had a problem, it would always happen on the second day. And so I started doing back-to-back long runs with the dogs that hadn't done 3 days in their life. So I do back-to-back like 24, 25-mile runs, and it's amazing how the first day they look great, and the second day there'll be dogs that about mile 20 get really tired. And you just need to know that for those dogs, if you take them, you're only taking them the first day. And once I did that, I never picked up a dog. And that was when we started really cruising and really winning those races on the second day's heat. Usually the first day you go out, you just try to get around safe and put yourself in a position to be competitive. The second day you can move so much. It's a dangerous day. You got to be careful you take the right dogs, and you're not picking anybody up. But other people will, and if you manage things right, you can make such a move on that second day. And then the third day is the race day. I mean, if you're already in a great position, you're just being protective. If not, you're going to win. So that's kind of the way that we approach those races.
Arleigh, I have a couple of questions for you. I always ask the same question to all of our guests when we end the episode, and that is to provide advice to somebody that's just getting involved in the sport. But before you answer that question, I have another question I would like you to answer. A couple of weeks ago, we had a guest on from England. Her name was Chantel Goodard, and her advice to our guests or our listeners was to manage the expectations of what you have on your dogs. Do you have a realistic expectation of what they can do out on the trail? And I'm really interested to hear what you have to say in regard to her advice. And and you're coming from an excellent perspective, of course, as a world-class racer and also as a researcher. How would you handle that question if somebody asked you that? How do you handle that expectation of what people expect with their dogs?
Well, first of all, I think she's exactly right. You can only race the dogs that you have. And I think your expectations should be focused on what those dogs can do under the conditions that you have. And so, you try to prepare them the best. Give you another example on preparation. We had a nice dog barn, and Fairbanks several times we'd leave here at 40 below and go down to Montana Creek and it'd be 40 above. But because the dogs lived inside, they could handle that change in heat. So setting them up for success, of course, is important. But then knowing what your dog team is capable of and only asking of them within those limits. And just, you learn that by the way that you train. And I think there's two big mistakes people make. They try to race other people's races rather than their own, and that's a big mistake. And the other one is, I think a lot of us train too fast. Like I said before, I think speed is a God-given talent, and I think dogs have speed or they don't, and when they do, you don't have to see it all the time. You just have to show it to them in little bits and pieces, and I'll give you an example. When Guts won her last rendezvous in North America, she was 8 years old, and I knew that she'd had a limited number of speed heats left in her. So I changed our whole training program that year to make sure that whatever speed she had was going to be, she could use it in the race, but I wasn't going to use it up in training. We never did one 20-mile-an-hour mile in training, not a whole mile. We did shorter pieces. In longer runs, we'd let them go up to 20 miles an hour for maybe a quarter mile or half a mile, and then bring them right back down. So she was comfortable running at that speed, but I never pushed her at it. Our basic training pace was probably 17 to 18 miles an hour. We won every heat. We won every race that year, and she was in lead. I knew I needed her in lead to win, but we won the North American, we won the Rendezvous, and we even won Montana Creek, and it was a fairly fast Montana Creek race that year, a 16-mile race. I also limited the number of races I did that year because I knew that she probably had a limited number of race heats left in her. So, knowing what your dogs can do. I'll give you one more example, okay? When Roxy ran our team in 2017, she came to me after she'd gone around the trail and looking at the North American before the first day, and she asked me, what do you think I should shoot for a first day? And, I had worked with her. We kind of reversed roles. I was the coach and she was the driver. But I trained the dogs some of the time, too, and I knew those dogs because they were the ones I'd won with. And I asked her, I looked at her GPS to see how long the trail was because it changes a little year to year. And I asked her, how firm it was, and I looked at what the temperature was going to be, and I said, I think that this heat can be won in 64 minutes and 19 seconds. And it was really cold that first day. Her GPS didn't work, and she won it in 64:16. On the third day, she came to me and said, okay, we're going to add 8 miles. What should I shoot for? And I said, I think under these conditions that this race could be won in 94 minutes, and she won it in 94 minutes and 1 second.
Wow.
So, that's kind of gives you an example of knowing what your dogs are capable of doing and setting a reasonable expectation. And then, of course, you have to follow through and drive them accordingly. And I think, again, another mistake a lot of particularly newcomers make is your dogs can run 20 or 21 miles an hour. It's super fun to run that fast. But if you do that in the beginning of the race, there's sort of a physiological law that for every second per mile you go faster than you can maintain as an average speed in the first quarter of a run, you're going to go 7 to 10 seconds a mile slower in the last quarter of the run. So you can make up minutes, and that's what we did. If you look at our first and second rendezvous, we were 20 seconds behind Kevin Cook and Kenny and Eagle at the first Tudor Road crossing, even with them going on the airstrip, ahead of them coming off, and 2.5 minutes ahead of them at the finish line. So, we didn't go faster. We just kept a steady pace, and those guys went out a little bit fast and then slowed down coming home.
Such a wealth of knowledge, and I have to hear the advice if you haven't said it already. If that person comes up to you, Arleigh, and says, can you tell me one piece of advice on what I should do getting involved with the sport, whatever sport it is, one dog dry land all the way up to Iditarod, what would you give that advice to that individual just getting started?
I would say, find the part of our sport that you are really passionate about. Learn as much as you can from the people who have been successful. And I always approach dog mushing as sort of a Zen sport. There are many paths to enlightenment. There isn't just one way to do it. Find your own way, because you're never going to beat somebody, the best people like the Eagles of this world and the Buddies of this world. You're never going to beat them by copying what they do. Learn what they do. Understand what's great about what they do. But they don't have your dogs in your situation. You've got to build your own training program, putting together pieces of information you get from them and what you learn yourself by running your own dogs.
Very good. KP, close us out here.
No, I enjoy everything he says. Actually, one thing he said, it's actually my motto. It's you don't beat Buddy in Buddy's game. He's so right. He's so right. I enjoyed every single second of this conversation, Arleigh. Thank you so much for spending the last 25 minutes with us. Looking forward to chat with you again, and good luck with you with the summer and the fishing and hunting season.
Hey, thanks. And great to talk to you guys. Thanks for having me on.
So for our listeners, this is going to be a very special next episode, and I want to make sure that you guys stay tuned to us next week, because we're going to have Arleigh back on to talk about the other side of his career, the research and all that he's involved in. So hit that subscribe button and you will get that episode as soon as it drops. So on behalf of my co-host here, KP, this is Robert from the Dog Driver Show. We will see you guys next time. Goodbye.
From First Paw Media, this is the Dog Driver Show. We hope you enjoyed this podcast, and we invite you to subscribe in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll find a link on the episode notes. You can tap or swipe on the episode cover art, and you can see some offers from our sponsors. You can support our show by supporting them. If you like what you have heard, we would love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe too. Your hosts are Robert Forto and Kurosh Parto. Our producer is Robert Forto and created for First Paw Media.